Section 1 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Reading by Matt Perard. Venezuela, Her Government, People, and Boundary by William E. Curtis, ex-director of the Bureau of the American Republics. Along the Spanish Main, from Trinidad to the Isthmus, is a mixture of Florida and Switzerland, where one can find within the radius of a single day's journey any climate or scene to suit his taste, from a tropical jungle swarming with tigers and gators to mountain crests crowned with eternal snow. The Andes and the Cordilleras, forming a double spinal column for the continent, split and scatter and jump into the sea. At the very edge of the ocean, within view of passing vessels, are peaks whose snow-capped summits seem to hang in the air. The Nevada de la Santa Marta, 17,500 feet high, affords one of the most majestic spectacles in all nature. Tourists are always incredulous when the peak is pointed out to them, for it resembles a bank of clouds. But they are finally compelled to admit the truth of geography, for clouds do not stand transfixed in the sky, unchangeable and immovable, like this phenomena. Between these mountains and along the coast are narrow valleys of luxurious tropical verdure and a rich soil. Valleys which yield 3 harvests annually and are densely populated. Coffee, sugar, and chocolate are the staples of the lower region, called tierra caliente, hot earth. Corn, beans, and other products of the temperate zone are raised upon the mountainsides, and higher, 7,000 or 8,000 feet above the level of the sea, are herds of goats and cattle. The population of Venezuela is about 2½ millions, not including 260,000 Indians, and there are 9 states, 1 federal district, and 5 territories. The country is still in a primitive and comparatively undeveloped condition. Outside the principal cities, it has made little or no progress since the yoke of Spain was thrown off, and the population is believed to be less than it was then. Agricultural and industrial development has been retarded by political revolutions and a lack of labor and capital, but the property of foreigners who do not meddle with local affairs is seldom disturbed, and the government offers liberal inducements for colonization and investment. Manufacturing establishments are almost unknown. There is little machinery in the country, and industry is generally carried on in the households and by the most primitive processes. There is an abundance of convenient water power, but fuel is scarce and expensive. Therefore, the future wealth of Venezuela, as well as her present prosperity, lies in the development of her agricultural resources, which are almost boundless, and her mineral deposits, which are among the richest and most accessible. Coffee is the great staple, and the product is unsurpassed. It has been the unhappy lot of Venezuela to have been the scene of almost constant warfare. There is not a country in the world whose history is more stained with blood. She is the Hungary, the Poland of South America. There is scarcely a city or a settlement within the limits of the Republic which at some time or another has not suffered total or partial destruction, and scarcely a mountain top from which some battlefield may not be seen. During colonial times, Venezuela was cuffed and kicked about by Spain, so that her people were in almost constant rebellion, and since her independence was established, 3/4 of a century ago, her political leaders have kept her like an armed camp. Most of her rulers have been elected by bullets and bayonets instead of by ballots, and most of her great men have died in exile, to have their bones brought home in after years with tremendous honors and buried under monuments of marble and statues of bronze. The President of Venezuela is assisted in the performance of his duties by a cabinet of 8 members. He receives a salary of $1,000 a month, a house to live in, horses and carriages, servants and furniture, and in fact everything except his food. He conducts himself very much like the President of the United States. His daily routine is similar, and he is annoyed by office seekers to about the same degree. He commences business at 6:30 in the morning, and often has cabinet meetings as early as 7. The government offices open at 7, when all the clerks and officials are expected to be on hand, no matter how late they were dancing or dining the night before, but they knock off work at 11 for their breakfast and siesta, and do not return to their desks again until 2. Cabinet ministers are paid $6,000 a year and congressmen $2,500, without any additional allowances, but the sessions do not last more than 3 months usually, so that they may engage in their regular occupations the rest of the year. The standing army is composed of 5 battalions of infantry, 1,842 men, 1 battery of artillery, 301 men, and 1 regiment of cavalry, 325 strong. Besides these regulars, who garrison the capital and the several forts throughout the country, there is a federal militia which is drilled annually and required to respond to the call of the government at any time. The rank and file of the army is composed exclusively of Indians, Negroes, and half-breeds. They are obedient, faithful, and good fighters. Some of the fiercest battles the world has ever known have taken place in Venezuela with these poor fellows on both sides. Their uniform in the field is a pair of cotton drawers, a cotton shirt, a cheap straw hat, and a pair of sandals. But when they come to occupy the barracks in town and do guard duty around the government buildings, they are made to wear red woolen trousers, blue coats, and caps of red and blue, with regular army shoes. The officers are generally good-looking young fellows of the best families, who take to military service and enjoy it. They wear well-kept uniforms, have good manners, and are usually graduates of the university. The government has established a school of industry for the education of the Indian children, and every year a commission is sent to obtain recruits for the army among them. The boys are taught trades and all sorts of handicraft, as well as reading, writing, and arithmetic, and the girls are drilled in the duties of the home. When they have reached an age when their faculties are fully developed and their habits fixed, they are sent back among the tribe as missionaries, not to teach religion, but civilization, and the Indians are said to be improving rapidly under the tuition of their own daughters and sons. The chief towns of Venezuela are Caracas, the capital, and La Guaira, its seaport; Valencia, which lies upon a curious lake, one of the most interesting of natural phenomena; Puerto Cabello, where Sir Francis Drake died and was dropped into the water with a bag of shot at his heels; and Maracaibo, upon the lake of the same name, from which we get much of our coffee. The chief seaport of Venezuela, La Guaira by name, has the reputation among sailors of having the worst harbor in the world. It is merely an open roadstead, beset by almost all the dangers and difficulties which seamanship can encounter. Even in calm weather, the surf rolls up with a mighty volume and dashes into spray against the rocks upon which the town is built. But when a breeze is blowing, and one comes almost every afternoon, the waves are so high that loading or unloading vessels is dangerous and often impossible. Between La Guaira and Caracas is a mountain called La Silla, which reaches nearly 9,000 feet toward the sky and springs directly from the sea. There is only a beach about 200 feet in width at the foot of the peaks, along which La Guaira is stretched 2 miles or so, a single street. Part of the town clings to the side of the monster like a creeper to the trunk of a tree, and one wonders that the earthquakes which are common there do not shake the houses off into the ocean. The distance in a straight line through the base of the mountain would be only about 4 miles, and a Washington engineer once made plans for a tunnel and a cable railway, but it was too expensive an undertaking. Over the dip in the saddle is an Indian trail about 8 miles long, and in 1883 English engineers and capitalists built a railroad 24 miles long between the two places, which climbs 3,600 feet in about 20 miles, and creeps through a pass to the valley in which the capital is situated. It is a remarkable piece of engineering and offers the traveler a scenic view whose picturesqueness and grandeur have been extolled from the time the Spanish invaders came, in 1520, until now. Humboldt says there is no picture combining the scenery of the mountains and the ocean so grand as this, except the Peak of Teneriffe. It is as if Pike's Peak rose abruptly from the beach at Long Branch. There is nothing Indian about Caracas except its name, and it is one of the finest cities in South America. The climate is superb, being a perpetual spring, the thermometer seldom rising above 85 degrees and seldom falling below 60. There is not a stove, nor a fireplace, nor a chimney in the town. There is no glass in the windows. The nights are always cool, and in the daytime there is a difference of 10 or 12 degrees in temperature between the shady and the sunny sides of the street. In 1812 the city was entirely destroyed by an earthquake, and 20,000 people were killed. It came on Holy Thursday, when the citizens were preparing for the great religious fiesta of the year. There was not a cloud in the sky, and not a thought of danger in the minds of the people, when suddenly the town began to rock, the church bells tolled voluntarily, and a tremendous explosion was heard in the bowels of the earth. In a second the city was a heap of blood-stained ruins, and the air was filled with shouts of horror and the shrieks of the dying. There have been several earthquakes since, attended with serious casualties, and while the people profess not to fear them, they build the walls of their houses 3 and 4 feet in thickness, and seldom make them more than 1 story high. The people of Caracas have an opera supported by the government, a university, art galleries, public buildings that are beautiful and expensive, and homes in which one can find all the evidences of a refined taste that are known to civilization. While, in some respects, the people are 200 years behind our own, and while many of their manners and customs appear quaint and odd when judged by our standard, there is no social station in America or Europe which the educated Venezuelan would not adorn. Their women are proverbial for their beauty and grace, and their men for their deportment. There is no convenient way of getting from Caracas to the Orinoco country except by sea. Of course one can cut across lots, and many people, armies indeed, have gone that way, but it is a long, tedious, and difficult journey, and dangerous at times because of the mountains to be climbed, the forests to be penetrated, the rivers to be forded, and the trackless swamps. To a naturalist the trip is full of fascination, for the trail leads through a region prolific with curious forms of vegetable and animal life. To reach Ciudad Bolivar, formerly known as Angostura, the political capital as well as the commercial metropolis of the Orinoco country, is neither difficult nor expensive, and aside from the heat, the journey is comfortable. It is like going from New York to Memphis by sea, however, although not so great a distance. There are no native means of transportation, but you can take of the English, French, or German steamers, and they are usually leaving La Guaira as often as twice a week to Port of Spain on the British island of Trinidad. At least once a week, and generally twice, a steamer leaves Port of Spain for the upper Orinoco. The time required to make the journey depends upon the season of the year and the condition of the river. If you are going during the rainy season, that is, from the 1st of May to the 1st of November, you can read Ciudad Bolivar in 3 days. But during the dry season, when the river is low, navigation is slow and difficult because of snags, bars, and other obstructions. At Ciudad Bolivar, the traveler shifts his baggage to a smaller craft, similar to those that ply the Ohio, Tennessee, and other streams of the United States, and starts onward for the head of navigation, wherever that may be. It is possible to go within 2 days' journey on muleback of Bogota, the capital of Colombia, by taking the Meta, one of the chief affluents of the Orinoco, and by passing southward through the Cassiquiare, the Amazon can be reached. Few people are aware that a boat entering the mouth of the Orinoco can emerge again into the sea through the Amazon without leaving the water. This passage is not navigable for large steamers because of rapids and obstructions, but it might be made clear at an expense that would be very slight in comparison with the advantages gained. Another branch goes nearly to Quito, the capital of Ecuador, and in fact its affluents are so numerous and so large that in all the 500,000 square miles of territory drained by the Orinoco, there is scarcely a point more than 3 or 4 days' journey by mule from navigable waters, and there are said to be 430 navigable branches of the river. From the Atlantic to the Andes, from the chain of the Cordilleras that hugs the coast of the Caribbean to the legend-haunted Sierra de la Parima, there is an area as large as the valley of the Mississippi and similar in its configuration, capable of producing mighty crops of nearly everything the world feeds on, and affording grazing ground for millions upon millions of cattle. From the foothills of the mountains in which the sources of the river are, 2,000 miles to the sea, are great plains or llanos, like those of Iowa and Illinois, almost entirely destitute of timber, except along the courses of the rivers, where valuable trees are found. The scenery for the greater part of the voyage is interesting, but as you reach the upper waters and enter the foothills of the Andes, it becomes sublime. But there steam navigation ceases, and canoes paddled by Indians are the only means of transportation. The heat along the lower river is intense, but the boats are built so as to protect the traveler from the sun and afford the greatest degree of coolness possible. The water is turbid and muddy, the banks are low, and the Orinoco, like the Missouri, often tires of its old course and cuts a new one through fields or forest. On either side the coarse grass and reeds grow tall, and toward the end of the season are topped with tassels that nod and droop in the sun. At daybreak, long lines of pelicans and other water birds, awakened by the breathing of the steamer, go clanging out to sea, and as morning wakens, the thin blue mist that nature nightly hangs upon the river rises and leaves the slender rushes that lined the banks to quiver in the burning glare. Toward noonday a breeze springs up, which is as regular and faithful as the stars. It cools the atmosphere, covers the surface of the river with pretty ripples, and makes life possible under a tropic sun. There is no twilight. The sun jumps up from below the horizon in the morning and jumps down again at night, and then for a few moments the sky, the river, and the savannas are one vast rainbow, livid with colors so spread and blended that the most unpoetic eyes cannot behold it without admiration and awe. The smaller streams are sheltered by flower bespangled walls of forest, gay with innumerable insects and birds, while from the branches which overhang them long trailers droop and admire their own gorgeousness in nature's mirror. Majestic trees, whose solitude was undisturbed for centuries, are covered with decorations that surpass the skill of art, their trunks and limbs concealed by garlands finer than were ever woven for a bride. Masses of scarlet and purple orchids, orange and crimson, blue and gold, all the fantastic forms and hues with which nature bedecks her robes under the fierce suns and the faltering rains of the tropics. The only place of real importance, the entrepôt of all commerce, the headquarters of all trade, the source of all supplies, and the political as well as the commercial capital of nearly half of the Republic of Venezuela, is Ciudad Bolivar. It has about 12,000 inhabitants, representing almost every nation on earth. It is built upon a clay bluff about 70 feet above high water mark, so that it is in no danger of being swept away. During the 6 months of the dry season, when the water is low, most of the shipping business is transacted upon the beach. The government has concentrated at Ciudad Bolivar the civil and military authority. It has the only custom house upon the entire Orinoco system, and practically the only courts. The city resembles other Spanish American towns, for they are all alike, has a number of pretty foliage shaded squares, several rather imposing government buildings, a cathedral, a public market, a theater, a college, and the inevitable statues of Bolivar, the liberator, and Guzman Blanco, the regenerator of Venezuela. The volume of business done there is enormous in proportion to the population, as it is the supply point and the port of shipment for a large and productive area. Within the last few years the exports of gold alone from that little town have been valued at $39,000,000. The principal merchants are Germans, the restaurant keepers are Italians, and the laboring classes are Negroes from the West Indies or Canary Islands. Ships from all ports in the world land at the piers, and the flags of every nation may be seen floating from the poles on the housetops. The manufacture of cigars is extensive, as excellent tobacco is cultivated in the neighborhood, and in almost every household the women employ their spare time rolling the leaves into what are known in the nomenclature of North America as wheeling stogas. They are used in amazing quantities by the Negro roustabouts, and are sent down the river to Los Tablas, from whence they are carried on muleback 150 miles into the interior to the mines. The most profitable mine in Venezuela, and one that is famous all over the world, is El Callao, situated on the borders of the disputed territory in the state of Bolivar, about 150 miles south of the Orinoco River. I suppose that the richest gold mine ever discovered was the Consolidated Virginia, the mine from which so many of the California mining kings drew their enormous fortunes. It is difficult to calculate the output of the old Spanish mines in South America, but El Callao is reckoned second to the Consolidated Virginia in the amount of gold produced, and I understand that it has already produced more free gold than any other ever opened. It was worked by the Indians long ago, at least its location corresponds with that of a legendary deposit from which the savages of Venezuela got much of the gold taken from them by the Spaniards. But after the latter took possession of the country, its existence was a matter of much doubt, until 4 Jamaica Negroes happened to run across it on a prospecting tour. 3 agreed to sell their share in the discovery to a party of Corsicans for a nominal price. The 4th Negro decided to keep his interest, and has always been glad that he did so, for within the next 2 or 3 years he was able to return to his native island where he has since lived like a nabob at the city of Kingston, the richest man in Jamaica. The Corsicans, when they began to realize the value of the property, sent two of their number to England and succeeded in raising sufficient money to build a stamp mill and introduce other necessary machinery. But they did not capitalize their company at 10 or 20 millions of dollars, as is customary in the United States, nor did they put any of their stock on the market. They issued only 32 shares, which were sold originally at $2,500 a share cash, making their entire capital $80,000. These shares have since sold for $500,000 each, at which rate the mine would be worth $16 million, but most of them are still in the possession of the original subscribers. There is little immigration and labor is scarce. Most of the miners are Negroes from Jamaica, Trinidad, and other West India islands. They appear to be the only class of human beings who can endure the climate, for the land is low and the mines are situated almost directly on the equator. The country is comparatively healthy, but the rays of the sun are intense, and until a man becomes acclimated, he is easily prostrated by exposure. Wood is the only fuel, and a very poor quality costs $7 a cord. Some of the mines are within and some without the territory claimed by England, but Great Britain has two gunboats upon the Orinoco, and at the first possible excuse will take possession of the entire mineral district. Such an act would be audacious, but would be heartily welcomed by the people, who would very much prefer an English colonial government to Venezuelan rule. I have been told by dozens of men, Americans, Germans, native Venezuelans, and representatives of other nations, that if the question were submitted to the miners, the decision would be almost unanimously in favor of England. The most popular and populated diggings are on the Barima River in the disputed territory, where several $1,000,000 of foreign capital, mostly British, is invested, and some 20,000 miners are at work. The colonial authorities of Guiana have calmly occupied this territory, organizing police, appointing local magistrates, assuming legislative as well as executive jurisdiction, providing laws and regulations for the government of the mining camps, requiring prospectors to obtain licenses from the colonial officials at Georgetown before commencing work, and to advertise their claims and locations to the official gazette of the colony. These regulations have been imposed by the British colonial authorities within a territory to which they did not claim ownership until the discovery of gold, and over which they did not attempt to exercise jurisdiction until 1883. And as new mines have been discovered, they have gradually pushed their frontier line westward, until it now includes nearly twice as much territory as they claimed 20 years ago, and 7 times as much as was ceded to Great Britain by Holland in 1814. It is true that the Venezuelans have shown no enterprise or activity in developing their own resources. They have permitted foreign prospectors to enter and occupy the mining districts at their will, and have never attempted to exercise police or even administrative control in the mining camps. The original prospectors, being Englishmen, naturally looked to the colonial government at Georgetown for protection, and the other foreigners fell in without a question, acknowledged British sovereignty, and obeyed British law. It was within this disputed territory between the Orinoco and the Amazon that the ancient voyagers located the mythical city of Manoa, the El Dorado upon which the wonder and greed of 2 centuries were concentrated. Tidings of its barbaric splendor were brought home by every voyager, and each caravel that left the shores of Europe carried ambitious and avaricious men, who hoped to share its plunder before their return to Spain. But the alluring El Dorado was not a place, it was a man. The term signifies the gilded. and was originally applied to a mythical king who every morning was sprinkled with gold dust by his slaves. The nuggets of gold and the rudely wrought images which Sir Walter Raleigh laid at the feet of Queen Elizabeth when he returned from his exploration of the Orinoco doubtless came from the now famous mine of El Callao. But the El Dorado was never found. No courage could overcome, no persistence could discover what did not exist, and the fabulous king of the fabulous island still sits on his fabulous throne, covered from his fabulous crown to his fabulous sandals with a fabulous dust of gold. Note: the foregoing article is an abstract of a lecture delivered before the National Geographic Society by Mr. Curtis, January 10, 1896. The lecture itself consisted of selected extracts from Mr. Curtis's book Venezuela, A Land Where It's Always Summer, which will shortly be published by Harper and Brothers. End of Section 1.
Section 2 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. The Panama Canal Route by Robert T. Hill, United States Geological Survey. Within the space assigned to me for the discussion of the most unpopular of the three rival Isthmian routes, I can do little more than present a brief summary of the facts concerning the Panama Canal. At the outset, it may be stated that if the Nicaragua route could be exclusively controlled by the United States, even if it was far more costly, my personal preference would be for it. In no case, however, does such personal preference necessitate or justify misstatements as to the rival Panama route, concerning which, since it was allowed to pass out of American control into the hands of the French and to become involved in serious financial difficulties, public opinion in this country seems to be singularly misinformed. That this route is in control of a foreign power, that it is a rival enterprise to one supposedly controlled by a private corporation, in which American citizens and officials are interested, and that it has fallen into ill repute through scandalous mismanagement, are facts which are undeniable. These questions of administration have, however, little to do with the purely scientific problem of what constitutes the most feasible route for uniting the two oceans by a maritime canal. Some patriotic Americans, while admitting that national prejudices draw them to a preference for the rival route, can yet see the arguments on both sides of the question and can distinguish the proposition that the financial failure of the Panama Canal Company in Paris is no condemnation of the feasibility of the Panama Canal route. The engineering investigations that have been conducted since the practical suspension of operations on any extensive scale on the canal itself have been singularly overlooked. At least 3 thoroughly equipped corps of engineers have resurveyed the entire route and recommended modifications in the plans. The reports of 2 of these commissions describing the improved lock level system are in print. The 3rd and more recent commission was engaged in studying the canal during my visit to the isthmus in January 1895. It comprised a large and competent body of skilled engineers, and my final word must be held in reserve until this commission has made its report. In the meantime, what are the principal facts concerning the feasibility of the Panama route? 1. It is the shortest of all, being only 42.5 miles from sea to sea, across about 20 miles of which The canal has been completed to 28 feet below sea level, making the actual present distance between the two oceans less than 25 English miles, or about 1/7 of the actual distance, 170 miles, to be overcome between Greytown and San Juan in the case of the Nicaragua route. 2. It is the only possible tidewater route in the whole Isthmian region. To accomplish it would, it is true, require great engineering and constructional feats, but in no respect impossible ones. 3. It is said by competent and reliable engineers to be feasible for a lock-level route. The plan proposed involves the construction of a dam at Bujio or San Pabloa of about the same size as that which is admitted to be necessary at San Carlos on the Nicaragua route, together with 6 locks. The construction of this dam would create a summit lake 125 feet above tidewater and 12 miles in length if placed at San Pabloa, or 21 miles if located at Bujio. In addition to giving free summit navigation, such a lake would control the floods of the upper Chagres, storing them in the rainy season and supplying water to the summit lock levels. 4. It is in a region comparatively free from seismic disturbance, and one in which no volcanic action has occurred since late Tertiary time. The Nicaragua route is within a zone of topographically destructive volcanic disturbance, where earthquakes are frequent. 5. It has what no other route possesses: excellent terminal harbor facilities with anchorage at both oceans so improved that ships can enter and leave at will. 6. It has been minutely surveyed. Every foot of the trace has been cleared of vegetation and partially excavated and tested by borings, so that the actual problems of construction are approximately known. As to problems that will surely arise in the work on the other route, we have absolutely no data. 7. It has on the Caribbean side only 31 miles of flooded thalweg, 21 of the Chagres and 10 of the Obispo, to be threaded and controlled, against 111 miles in the case of the rival route. It is true that the Nicaragua route proposes to avoid a part of the San Juan by a cut of 40 miles, but the control of the remainder will be a similar and probably as serious a problem as that presented by the Chagres. From 10 to 15 miles of the latter have been completely diverted, and the remainder can be controlled by the proposed summit-level lake. In the case of a sea-level plan, the diversion would still be a great problem, but by no means an insurmountable one. 8. It will be the cheapest route to construct. The plan already furnished with 2/5 of the excavation now completed for a sea-level route, including expense of administration and machinery, has actually cost $150 million. Upon this basis, it is estimated that the entire length of 42.5 miles will cost $116 million more upon the lock-level plan. A sea-level route would cost $200 million more. The amount of work necessary to complete the Panama Canal is far less than would be required to construct the Nicaragua route. Engineers admit that 40 miles of excavation, almost equivalent to the entire length of the Panama Canal, are necessary along the rival route. What the cost of the construction of the Nicaragua route will be can never be told until the actual work is well underway. 9. It is nautically the most important route, being more centrally situated relatively to the two continents. Its Caribbean terminus is as near by sailing and steaming routes, both to the North Atlantic and European ports, as is Greytown, while its Pacific terminus is far more convenient to the South American trade. 10. Politically, it is the only route at present possessing treaty rights under guaranteed neutrality with any Isthmian country, by which canal construction can be permitted. The region through which it passes is American in interest and practically under our protectorate, and a neutral canal across it, even though the French construct it, would give us all the privileges now apparently to be obtained via Nicaragua under the Bulwer-Clayton Treaty. The foregoing are the salient facts concerning the Panama route. An important point to remember is that underground conditions, both favorable and unfavorable, and which were not anticipated from the preliminary surveys, have been encountered in the course of construction. For instance, the 25 kilometers of the canal on the Caribbean side were contracted for and paid for as rock cutting, when the material proved to be, for the most part, the easiest kind of earth excavation. On the other hand, an utterly unlooked-for obstacle developed in the creeping of the clays for about a mile along the Culebra summit. These are geological considerations with regard to which we have absolutely no information along the Nicaragua line, and it is urgently needed. Although not essentially pertinent to the subject of feasibility, a few words concerning the actual present status of the canal construction may be of interest. The company has passed through the ordeal of experimentation and financial failure, and its affairs are now in the French courts, under whose direction accurate researches have been prosecuted during the past year to ascertain the exact expenditures of the late company and to determine what steps are necessary to complete the work. Upon the report of the Commission will depend the completion of the canal. The French people have put too much money into the enterprise not to complete it, and Americans need not deceive themselves with the expectation that the work is abandoned or that the company is utterly bankrupt. Almost the entire plant, including dredges, railway locomotives and other machinery, track, barges, steam vessels, pontoons and locks, houses, shops, etc., for the completion of the work is on the ground, and this alone represents a large proportion of the money expended by the old company. This plant is not undergoing the ruinous decay that has been represented in this country, but on the contrary, it is kept in scrupulously good order and will be available for the completion of the work. The old Panama Company was responsible for nearly $266 million, of which it spent $150 million upon the plant and construction and criminally distributed nearly $100 million among the dishonest parties who brought the company into disrepute. In the hands of the courts, however, there still remains some $20 million awaiting the reorganization of the company. That the present commission does not consider the route impracticable is attested by the fact that they have kept the work progressing, about 2,000 laborers having been employed upon the construction of the canal during the past year. When in February 1895 I took the photograph reproduced as an illustration to this article, I counted 5 locomotives at work carrying away the excavations from the Culebra summit. No available news comes to this country from France concerning the operations of the canal. The Outlook, however, in a recent issue, makes the following statement. It was announced recently that the French company in charge of the work on the Panama Canal is now collecting 2,000 more men from Jamaica and other West Indian islands to add to the 1,800 now at work, and that it is intended eventually to increase the force to 6,000 men. The New York Evening Post declared that it had received information, which it considered trustworthy, that the money to finish the work on the present plan has all been furnished, and that nothing can prevent the opening of the canal at the appointed time, except accidents and obstacles not now anticipated. The managers even expect that the work will be completed in 6 years. This is quite in line with the report made by Sir Henry Tyler, the late president of the Grand Trunk Railway, who has been visiting Panama. He says that it is proposed to construct 2 large dams, one across the upper Chagres and one on the lower Chagres River. 2 lakes will thus be formed, the upper one supplying water to the higher portion of the canal, while the lower one will be mainly used to furnish water for the navigation of the lower part. 10 locks will be built, enabling the canal to reach a height of 170 feet above the sea level. Sir Henry holds that there is no insuperable difficulty in the completion of the canal in 6 years at a cost of $100 million by utilizing the work already done for a distance of 16 miles from Colón and 4 miles from Panama. Comparative table: Nicaragua and Panama routes. Natural distance sea to sea: Nicaragua 169.5 miles, Panama 42.5 miles. Present distances sea to sea: Nicaragua 169.5 miles, Panama 25 miles. Natural altitude continental pass: Nicaragua 147 feet, Panama 260 feet. Same as reduced by artificial cutting: Nicaragua 147 feet, Panama 246 feet. Miles of river course: Caribbean side, Nicaragua 111, Panama 31. Miles of river course below site of proposed dams: Nicaragua 32, Panama 21. Proportion of above diverted by artificial cutting: Nicaragua blank, Panama 10. Proposed height: summit level, Nicaragua 110 feet, Panama 125 feet. Proposed dams to create summit level: Nicaragua 1, Panama 1. Miles of proposed summit navigation: Nicaragua 144.8, Panama 12 or 21. Proposed locks: Nicaragua 7, Panama 6. Excavation: miles originally proposed: Nicaragua 40.3, Panama 42.5. Miles of excavation completed for lock plan: Nicaragua 0, Panama 15 to 20. Miles of excavation to be completed for lock plan: Nicaragua 40.3, Panama 10. Note 1. Terminal harbors: Nicaragua none, Panama completed. Plant on ground for completion: Nicaragua blank, Panama all. Estimated costs to complete canals: Nicaragua $133,500,000. Note 2. Panama $116 million. Note 1. The adoption of the lock level plan will avoid several miles of excavation originally contemplated in sea level plan. Note 2. U.S. Commission. End of section 2.
Section 3 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Tehuantepec Ship Railway by Elmer L. Cortell, CE, DSc, etc. The world is still discussing the question of the best route by which to facilitate interoceanic traffic between the Atlantic and the Pacific. Commercial interests now center on 3 routes: Panama, Nicaragua, and Tehuantepec. The first has entailed enormous expenses on France and involved many of its prominent citizens in serious complications. The second has been specially urged on the United States as the American route. The third, advocated for many years by a great genius, has been advanced to such a state by Mexico as to be the only work that present conditions have justified. Addressing ourselves to the advantages of the Tehuantepec route, its interesting constructive, commercial, and geographic features must be prefaced by a brief historical resume. The Mexican Republic, in 1824, invited proposals to open the Isthmian route, but internal dissensions delayed action. In 1842, Santa Anna granted a charter to José de Garay, but the only tangible result was the complete survey of the isthmus by Gaetano Moro, an able Italian engineer. In 1850, efforts to negotiate treaty rights for the United States in this respect failed, but by the Tehuantepec Railroad Company, chartered by Mexico, exhaustive surveys of the route were made under the direction of General J. G. Barnard, USA, by Mr. J. J. Williams, whose report of 1852 is the most complete ever published. In 1868, the Louisiana Tehuantepec Company conducted a large transportation business of freight and passengers over a partly built wagon road, but its charter of 1857 was soon forfeited. The life of the La Serre Grant of 1867, nullified in 1879, was marked by the active interest of the United States in the problem of interoceanic communication. In 1870, Commodore Shufeldt, sailing with an able corps of Army and Navy assistants, exhaustively surveyed Tehuantepec and Nicaragua, and in his report strongly advocated the Tehuantepec route for its many advantages. Mexico cooperated in an independent survey under Señor M.F. Leal, now her Secretary of Public Works. It was President Diaz who initiated railroad construction and has so earnestly persisted in efforts to open an international route across this isthmus. Under the charter of 1878, Mr. Edward Leonard, an American, constructed 22 miles, receiving a subsidy of $12,000 per mile, but in 1882 he surrendered his charter to the Mexican government, receiving by arbitration under charter provisions $125,000 in Mexican silver and $1,500,000 in gold. These futile private efforts led Mexico to undertake the work herself, but she soon reverted to the contract system, and under Mr. D. Sanchez, a Mexican, some miles of track were laid on the Atlantic and Pacific sides at an expense of $1,434,135 in Mexican silver. In 1882, a loan of £2,700,000 was negotiated, and Mr. E. McMurdo of London contracted to repair the track built and complete the road proper. Much work was done, but Mr. McMurdo died, and the contract was abrogated, the company having failed to comply with its terms. Some $2 million of Mexican silver remained, and with this sum and an additional appropriation of $1,111,035 in silver, Messrs. C. S. Stanhope, J. H. Hampson, and E. L. Cortell completed the railroad in 1894. Mexico now operates it and is spending $1 million in gold under a contract with Mr. S. Hermanos to perfect the equipment and finish some permanent structures. Since 1878, including the last contract and excluding interest, Mexico has spent on the route $16 million in gold and $2,670,170 in Mexican silver. The completion and operation of this railroad will greatly facilitate the construction of the ship railway when the time arrives to build it, as it may with great advantage be employed to distribute supplies, materials, and laborers along the line of the ship railway, and thus be used as an auxiliary line, which Mr. Eads had intended to build in advance for this purpose. Permit me now to state the part taken by Mr. Eads in solving the problem of interoceanic transit. In a letter to the New York Tribune, June 10, 1879, he advocated a ship railway at Panama instead of a ship canal. As against the doubtful project of a ship canal and in favor of a ship railway, he said, quote, "My own studies have satisfied me of the entire feasibility of such transportation by railroad, and I have no hesitation in saying that for a sum not exceeding one-third of the estimated cost of the canal, namely about $50 million, the largest ships which enter the port of New York can be transferred, when fully loaded, with absolute safety across the isthmus on a railway constructed for the purpose, within 24 hours from the moment they are taken in charge in one sea until they are delivered into the other, ready to depart on their journey." Unquote. He urged the construction of a ship railway on de Lesseps, but the great Frenchman said, "A canal at sea level or nothing." He found nothing at a cost not of $120 million, but of $250 million. Mr. Reeds then turned his attention to the much more advantageous route of Tehuantepec, only 800 miles from the Mississippi jetties, and it was my good fortune to be henceforth associated with him until his death. The concessions of May 1881, modified in 1885, provided for the construction and operation of the ship railway for 99 years. Many liberal provisions were included, such as the donation of about 2,700,000 acres of land, ample rights of way, right to collect tonnage and wharf dues. Far the most valuable grant was the guarantee that one-third of the net revenue of the company for 15 years from the opening of the railway should amount to $1,250,000, with the right to secure a similar guarantee for $2,500,000 to cover the remaining two-thirds of the interest from the foreign nations, but with the understanding that this guarantee should be sought from the United States. Mr. Reeds made the plans with his customary skill, and after obtaining the approval of many prominent naval architects and engineers, came to the United States Congress with a bill for the charter contemplated in the Mexican concession. Scarcely 2 months later, the promoters of the Nicaragua Canal came before Congress with a somewhat similar measure, and the two projects antagonized each other up to the death of Mr. Reeds in 1887. Meanwhile, the most exhaustive surveys were made and a satisfactory route was laid down between the ocean terminals of the isthmus. The requirements of the charter as to beginning construction work were fully complied with, and the amount of construction work done by Mr. Reeds will be best appreciated by the statement that about $500,000 in gold was expended. From the Tehuantepec Railroad to the Panama Railroad, measured along the Pacific coast, is about 1,200 statute miles, and to the Nicaragua Canal about 800 miles. All commerce from these more southern routes must pass directly by the Pacific terminus of the Tehuantepec Railroad in going to San Francisco, Oregon, Yokohama, or Hong Kong. On the Atlantic side, Tehuantepec has similar advantages in distance over southern routes. The calculation shows that on 18 routes to be affected by opening up Tehuantepec, the aggregate saving in distance over the present Cape routes and Panama is over 125,000 miles, and by sail routes nearly 200,000 miles. Mr. Thomas J. Vivian, an expert statistician of the Census Office, was engaged to make a report upon the probable traffic on the proposed ship railway. The results of his very careful and extended investigation and his clear analysis and grouping of a great number of facts fully justified his selection. The detailed estimates show that in 1896 we might expect a traffic of 5,288,000 tons of freight if the railroad were fully equipped and sufficient time had elapsed to develop the new commerce. At a rate of $2 per ton, to include handling and transporting from ship to ship, and adding to the total receipts from freight the passenger receipts, we will have a gross income of $10,576,000. Estimating the operating expenses at 60% of the gross receipts, which for through traffic is sufficient, we shall have a net income of $4,294,000. The estimates of traffic for a ship railway in the same conservative manner give a total traffic for 1896 of 7,263,000 tons, which at $2 per ton would yield a gross income of $14,526,000. Assuming the cost per ton for transporting from ocean to ocean, including all expenses, at 50 cents, the net income would be $11,044,000. The cost of moving steamships through any canal on the American Isthmus will amount to more than the cost of operating the ship railway. The time in transit through the restricted channels and locks at Nicaragua will be twice as great as the time required on the ship railway, and will even exceed the time required on the railroad to load on the cars, haul across the isthmus, and reload into vessels. The Suez Canal, immeasurably easier to maintain than any canal would be at either Panama or Nicaragua, cost for maintenance and working in 1883 $2,784,869. A careful study of the cost of operating the ship railway gives a safe estimate of 30 cents per ton. I have no doubt that with a traffic of 7 million tons this is ample, but I have decided to use 50 cents per ton in the present estimate. As to the cost of preparing the three routes under comparison for a large traffic, the ship railway, fully equipped for carrying vessels weighing 10,000 tons and 7 million tons of freight, will cost on a cash basis about $60 million. I shall not estimate the cost of building a ship canal at Panama or Nicaragua. The former, partly completed, certainly not over one half, has already cost probably $250 million in cash, and the plan changed from a sea-level canal to a lock canal, the practicability of which is extremely doubtful due to inadequate water supply in the dry season. And as to Nicaragua, we must rely upon the report, soon to be made public, of the able board of engineers appointed by the President. The presentation of the subject will not be complete without a resume of the proposed method of carrying ships overland by railway, for we are accustomed to regard any method that has not the sanction of use as visionary. Many projects for commercial ship railways have been made during the last 30 years. In 1872, Brunlees and Webb of Great Britain made plans for a ship railway across the American Isthmus at Honduras, which would have been built but for the financial depression that soon followed. It was intended to transport vessels of 1,200 tons register. The United States engineers have designed a steamboat railway to avoid the dangerous navigation of the Dalles of the Columbia River. The project and plans have received the approval of Congress, and an appropriation of $100,000 has been made to begin work. The ship railway of Nova Scotia, designed by Mr. H.G.C. Catcham, Sir John Fowler, and Sir Benjamin Baker, to connect the Gulf of St. Lawrence with the Bay of Fundy, deserves special attention as it is nearly completed. Of the $5,500,000 required, all but $1,500,000 has been expended. The line is about 17 miles long, and hydraulic lifts are used for raising the vessels. The platform on which the current vessel rests is about 40 feet wide. There are 20 hydraulic presses, each 25 inches in diameter, with a stroke of 40 feet, and the system is capable of lifting a vessel carrying 1,000 tons of cargo. There are 2 tracks of standard gauge, 18-foot centers, with rails weighing 110 pounds per linear yard. This ship railway would now be in operation but for the lapse of the government charter during a temporary failure of funds for construction. It is confidently expected that the renewal of the charter and an extension of time will soon be granted. The hopes of all advocates of ship railway methods are centered in this comparatively small railway at Chignecto. The main features of the ship railway designed for the Tehuantepec Isthmus are terminal docks provided with a great lifting steel pontoon which was sunken with a ship carriage to the bottom of a dock, guided in its movements by a large number of vertical cylinders. The ship is then floated in over the carriage and placed in exact position. The pontoon is pumped out, and the continuous keel block comes in contact with the keel of the vessel when a system of hydraulic rams working through the deck of the caisson pushes the keel block closely against the keel, and also a large number of bilge blocks and side supports against the side of the vessel. Each one moving up vertically comes in contact with the ship, when the adjustable surfaces of each support, which is faced with rubber, take the form of the vessel by means of a universal hinged joint. The weight of the vessel is thus uniformly distributed according to the principle on which the hydraulic system was designed. The locomotives are then coupled on, and the vessel hauled to the opposite terminal, where it is set afloat by exactly the reverse process. At 2 points on the isthmus it becomes necessary, in order to obtain grades of not more than 1% and to secure a practically straight line, to arrange for an abrupt change of direction, which is done by a great floating turntable, simply a hollow pontoon grounded on the bottom of a masonry basin when the car is hauled upon it, and then raised slightly upon its bearings by pumping water into the basin and made to revolve around a vertical central axis or guide until it takes the new direction. There is an important advantage which the ship railways have over the ship canals in the American Isthmus, particularly in such rainy portions of it as Panama and Nicaragua, the rainfall at the latter place ranging from 200 inches to 300 inches per annum. The advantage lies in the fact that the ship railway is always above the floods, while the canal is always below them and menaced at all times by most serious dangers. The Nicaragua route has been considered the American route. If it is so, then the Tehuantepec route is still more American in reference to all commercial features, and certainly is of more importance to us from a strategic point of view than any route out of the Caribbean. The clear and decided views of Admiral Shufeldt upon its advantages were expressed as follows. Quote, "Each isthmus rises into importance as it lies nearer the center of American political and commercial influence, and the intrinsic value of this eminently national work ought to be based upon the inverse ratio of the distance from that center. A canal through the Isthmus of Tehuantepec is an extension of the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. It converts the Gulf of Mexico into an American lake. In time of war, it closes that gulf to all enemies. It is the only route which our government can control. So to speak, it renders our own territory circumnavigable. It brings New Orleans, 1,400 nautical miles, nearer to San Francisco than a canal via Darien." Unquote. The Tehuantepec route can be made more easily accessible to the United States and Mexico by railroad, over which armies and munitions of war can be quickly transported. The Gulf of Mexico is clear of foreign complications, belongs to these two great republics of the New World, and when Cuba shall have become a state of the Union, as it may in the near future, we shall hold the entire circuit of this great sea. If, on the other hand, you look upon any English map of the Caribbean Sea, you will notice that this great power holds every entrance to it. Belonging to Great Britain, there are about 25 different countries and islands, from British Guiana on the east to British Honduras on the west, which, lying directly in front of Panama and Nicaragua, guard all approach to them. This important fact is not sufficiently appreciated in our plans for making the Nicaragua Canal a United States canal to be controlled, fortified, and defended by our comparatively small navy against the preponderating naval powers of Europe. President Diaz is so fully convinced of the superior advantages of even an ordinary railroad at Tehuantepec over any other route located at more southerly points that, in the face of the constant menace of the Nicaragua project, he has gone forward, in spite of stringent financial conditions in Mexico, to complete the national railroad of Tehuantepec, and now that it is completed, to provide adequate harbor terminal facilities and equipment for a large interoceanic traffic. He looks upon the consummation of this great commercial undertaking as one of the most beneficent works of his long and glorious administration. Note: the foregoing article is an abstract of a lecture delivered before the National Geographic Society, November 22, 1895. The lecture was considered so important a contribution to the literature of interoceanic communication that it has been printed in full as a public document by order of the Senate. See Senate Document Number 34, 54th Congress, First Session. End of note. End of Section 3.
Section 4 of The National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Availle in January 2016. The Present State of the Nicaragua Canal by General A.W. Greely, Chief Signal Officer, United States Army. The economic, physical, political, and strategic advantages of the Nicaragua Canal have been so fully dwelt upon that their presentation here is not called for, especially in view of the forthcoming report to Congress of the National Commission on this interoceanic waterway. This article is viewed as supplementary to the articles on the Panama Canal Route and the Tehuantepec Ship Railway, in order that the readers of the National Geographic Magazine may know the amount of work done on the Nicaragua Canal to date, its possible cost as given by the corporation engineers, and also as estimated by the National Commission, which latter forecast by the press is subject to correction. The following summary covers the main features of the work. The concession for the canal was granted by Nicaragua to the Maritime Canal Company of Nicaragua, incorporated under Act of Congress, February 20, 1889, which company reports annually to the Secretary of the Interior. Statements relative to work done are drawn from its report of December 3, 1892. This corporation contracted with the Nicaragua Construction Company for the construction of the canal. In the spring of 1889, detailed surveys of canal, locks, harbors, etc. were completed, the final location of the route was practically determined, and, after preliminary operations, the work of actual construction began October 9, 1889. To restore Greytown Harbor, a breakwater extending 1,000 feet into the ocean was built and filled in with brush mattresses, rock, and hydraulic cement concrete. A channel of 10 feet formed naturally, which was increased by dredging to 15 feet, and thus maintained until the accretions to the beach on the windward side of the jetty reached its outward extremity, when the sand passed to leeward and partially closed the new entrance. 5 groups of permanent buildings were erected near San Juan, including offices, hospitals, storehouses, etc., which covered an area of 1.75 acres. In addition, freight wharves, machine stops, etc. were built, and the more important establishments were connected by tramway. A clearing 468 feet wide was made through the dense forest growth from Greytown inland a distance of 10 miles, and a similar clearing of 9 miles was made to the west of Lake Nicaragua. A telegraph line of 60 miles extended inland to Castillo, and this system was supplemented by telephonic side service. A harbor wharf 260 feet long was built and equipped with modern steam conveniences for handling freight. A railway was constructed from Greytown a distance of 12 miles, with sidings, and was equipped with 4 locomotives, 50 cars, and suitable modern apparatus for railway and canal construction. The road built is of the most difficult character, as it traverses for 6 miles a swamp considered impassable, where a large amount of corduroy and fill work was required. The railway line was surveyed to Ochoa and its location determined, as well as from Lake Nicaragua to the Pacific. The contractors secured for their work the plant of the American Dredging Company, formerly used at Panama, consisting of 7 powerful dredges, 2 tugs, 20 lighters, pumps, etc. Dredging commenced west of Greytown Harbor in 1890, and there was opened to a point well inland, 1½ miles, a channel 17 feet deep and from 150 to 230 feet wide. The Matuca Rapids, San Juan River, were materially improved for steamboat navigation. In addition to this, exhaustive surveys and borings were made in connection with the Ochoa Dam, La Flor Dam, and other important points on the route. The superior employees were American, while the unskilled labor was performed by natives of Central America and by Jamaica Negroes. The health of the employees has been unusually good, the total deaths in 3 years giving a rate of 1.48% of cases treated. On November 9, 1890, the Nicaraguan government officially declared that the company had complied with the article requiring an expenditure of $2 million during the first year of work, thus confirming for a term of 10 years the company's concessionary rights. The financial troubles of 1893 first compelled the Nicaragua Canal Construction Company, under contract to build the canal, to limit its expenditures to the preservation of its plant, and finally to suspend all payments, which resulted in a receiver being appointed by a United States court in August 1893. The reconstruction of the contracting company has been accomplished, under the name of the Nicaragua Company, and it is now making preparations for resuming work on the canal. Meanwhile, the United States Senate, in connection with bills for aiding the construction of this canal, has carefully considered the whole subject, including the operations of the corporations mentioned above. 3 favorable reports have been made, 2 by Mr. Sherman, number 1944, 51st Congress, 2nd Session, and number 1142, 51st Congress, 2nd Session. The last by Mr. Morgan, number 331, 52nd Congress, 2nd Session, on April 14, 1894, adopts and reprints the first 2 reports. It appears that the Maritime Canal Company expended between October 5, 1889 and October 7, 1890, $3,099,971, and that the total expenditures of the construction company aggregate $4,451,568. The total length of the canal is to be 169.45 miles, of which 26.78 miles will be excavated canal and 142.67 free navigation, and there will be 3 locks on each side of Lake Nicaragua. The cost of the canal, equipped for full service and extending to deep water in both oceans through completed harbors, was estimated by Chief Engineer A.G. Menocal at $65,084,176, including 25% for contingencies. These estimates were increased by a revisionary board of 5 distinguished engineers, J. Bogart, E.T.D. Myers, A.M. Wellington, H.A. Hitchcock, and C.T. Harvey, to $73,166,308, which amount other special contingencies augmented to $87,799,570. Interest charges would raise the grand total to $100 million. The Senate committee states, however, that all work done has fallen within Mr. Menocal's estimates. The reports dwell upon the value of this interoceanic waterway to the United States, strategically, politically, and also economically. The committee placed the outside limit of the cost of the Nicaragua Canal at $100 million, and it therefore recommended that the United States guarantee $70 million of 3% bonds, which would vest the United States with the ownership of 70% of the entire capital stock. The final outcome of this report was the authorization by Congress of the appointment of a commission of engineers to examine and report upon the route and surveys of the Nicaragua Canal. This commission, consisting of Colonel W. P. Ludlow, U.S. Army, M.T. Endicott, U.S. Navy, and Alfred Noble, in the summer of 1895, examined the route and such of the work as had been done, and submitted its report to the President, by whom it will be transmitted to the present Congress. The character and substance of the report have not been officially made public. The New York Herald of November 25, 1895, put forth detailed accounts of the report, which lack official confirmation. The salient features of this article set forth that the Commission has increased the Canal Company's estimate of $69,893,660 to a provisional estimate of $133,472,893. Authoritative estimates can be obtained only at the cost of $250,000 for an exhaustive survey covering 2 dry seasons. The present location from Greytown to Brito is practically condemned, and it is suggested that the entrance to Greytown Harbor should be moved eastward and its depth increased to 6 fathoms, that the Brito Harbor should be moved southeastward and its breakwater extended considerably, and that the canal should be moved south of Bernard Lagoon and be straightened, etc. The proposed rock-filled dam at Ochoa, across a powerful river and on a sand foundation, presents grave difficulties, and should be built only after careful study, It should preferably be replaced by a masonry structure. The physical conditions and regimen of San Juan River and Lake Nicaragua should be carefully studied. The proposed channel excavated to widths varying from 250 to 400 feet instead of from 125 to 150 feet. All locks should be widened to 80 feet so as to permit the passage of war vessels. Rainfall observations should be instituted over the whole route. All streams be gauged, and full explorations of alternative routes be made in the Eastern Division. These recommendations of the Commission for a deeper and wider channel, for the construction of passing points, a reduction in lock lift, more capacious and deeper harbors, and a more stable construction, are in the direction of desirable improvements, which, however, practically double the cost of the canal. Even should these enhanced estimates be correct, and should the conservative judgment of the Commission be fully endorsed by other engineers, it remains to be seen whether a few millions of dollars, more or less, shall stand in the way of securing an interoceanic communication which the Senate Committee has said, quote, is indispensable to our physical and political geography and to the proper care of the government for the protection and prosperity of our Pacific coasts. End quote. In view of the national interest taken in this question, and especially at this juncture, it would seem that no backward step should be taken that would tend to weaken the power and influence of the United States as the dominating factor in the welfare of the American continents. From an American standpoint, this canal seems to be a necessity, not only for our own commercial interests and national protection, but also as part of our public policy of uniting the republics of America by works of peaceful development. End of section 4.
Section 5 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Explorations by the Bureau of American Ethnology in 1895 by W.J. McGee. The most extended exploratory work of the year was that of an expedition in charge of the writer through the territory occupied by the Papago Indians in Arizona and Sonora, and by the Seri Indians in western Sonora and on Tiburon and Alcatraz Islands in the Gulf of California. During 1894, an expedition was carried through Papagueria into the borderland of the Seri country for the purpose of making collections among the Indians of both tribes, and the object of the expedition in 1895 was to obtain supplemental information concerning the social organizations of the Papago Indians, but especially to explore the territory of the Seri and to make studies of and collections representing the maritime habits of these Indians. The party, outfitted in Tucson early in November, crossed the frontier at Sasabe and spent 3 weeks in visiting the villages of Papagueria and in surveying extensive prehistoric works left by a people of somewhat advanced culture, probably the ancestors of the modern Papago. Mr. Willard D. Johnson, who formed one of the party, carried forward a planetable survey, which will yield the first trustworthy map of the region. Entering the Seri territory in December, the party explored the area lying west of the Bucachi River and the delta of Sonora River, making a station on the highest point about 5,000 feet in the range provisionally designated with the Seri Mountains, and afterward embarked in a small boat in the portion of the Gulf of California commonly mapped as Kino Bay, coasted to the strait in Fernillo, and crossed over to and explored the surveyed Tiburon Island. The country of the Seri Indians was found to be clearly set apart by natural features from the body of Sonora. Tiburon Island is separated by a turbulent strait from the mainland, while the mountainous mainland area contiguous to the strait is still more effectively barred from interior Sonora by a broad desert zone of saline playas and sand dunes, something like the Mojave Desert of California. Indeed, some of the observations indicate that this lies below sea level, and that it was during the recent geological times cut off from the Gulf by the delta of Sonora River and afterward desiccated by evaporation. The territory bounded by this desert barrier is mountainous, yet exceedingly arid.
It is 2,000 or 3,000 square miles in area, including about 500 square miles comprised in Tiburon Island. The territory is claimed and exclusively held by the Seri Indians, a distinct aboriginal stock who have been at war with all other peoples almost constantly from time immemorial and are now reduced to some 400 in number. These Indians are of a special interest from their isolation, from a more warlike disposition and a more primitive culture than appear among other known people of North America, and from a variety of features connected with these characteristics. They are of splendid physique and a notably dark skin. They live chiefly on the flesh of turtles and other marine organisms, partly on game and wild fruits, most of their food being eaten raw. They are without agriculture and have no domestic animals save a few dogs. Their habitations are flimsy lodges of shrubbery and turtle shells. They are scantily clothed, chiefly in pelican skins. They navigate their water by means of the balsa, manufacture simple baskets, and a distinctive pottery. Make efficient use of excellent bows and arrows, yet their stone art is below the stage commonly called Paleolithic, and they have a singular marriage custom tending to perpetuate their isolation. No prehistoric works, save such as they now produce, are found in their territory. While the Indians fled at the approach of the party, considerable collections were made in the rancherias they had just deserted, the articles designed for barter with them being left in exchange. In addition to the ethnology researches and mapping, somewhat careful studies were made of the flora, fauna, and geologic development of the entire area traversed by the expedition. The exploration of the Seri country, hitherto unknown except as to the coast, was attended with some risk and hardship, due chiefly to the dearth of water, but was without casualty. In December 1894, Mr. James Mooney began a special study of the Kiowa Indians in Oklahoma. He recently returned from the field, after nearly 10 months of successful work. The Kiowa Indians possess a highly interesting calendar system of strictly aboriginal character, and this system was one of the subjects of Mr. Mooney's researches. Leading personages of the tribe keep a sort of yearbook in which the principal events of the seasons are recorded in rude conventional symbols, the years being indicated by conspicuous symbols for the winter season, in consequence of which the records are sometimes denominated winter counts. Mr. Mooney was able to collect a considerable number of these calendars, which are of special interest as records of the history and migrations of the tribe during the last half-century. From the records and from accompanying verbal statements, carefully checked by comparing different accounts, it is learned that this tribe of the plains is among the widest wanderers of their race. Although their original habitat was in the middle of the plains, they are accustomed to send parties on trading and marauding expeditions eastward into the trans-Mississippi forest, westward into and beyond the Rocky Mountains, northward to the Saskatchewan, and southward over the deserts of northern Mexico as far as Durango, and even across the Sierra Madre to the vicinity of the Pacific near Mazatlan. These records of the Kiowa calendars explain the wide distribution of primitive art products over the United States and corroborate the evidence of widely scattered obsidian, copper, seashells, etc. as the extent of aboriginal commerce. A notable expedition of the season was that of Dr. J. Walter Fox, who explored the little-known canyons of the Mogollon Escarpment in central Arizona and afterward made extensive collections of prehistoric pottery near Keams Canyon. While on the headwaters of the Rio Verde, along the face of the Great Escarpment, he was so fortunate as to discover extensive ruins of cliff houses, some of which show no evidence of exploration, and from these considerable collections of interesting archaeological material were made. His principal results were obtained at the prehistoric pueblo of Sitiaki near Keams Canyon. Here, in company with Mr. F. W. Hodge, he excavated a ruin known from tradition, as well as from the collection of objects discovered to be prehistoric. A large quantity of finely decorated pottery with associated objects were obtained. The pottery includes many examples of the finest grade of aboriginal work in texture, finish, and decoration. The collection, which comprises nearly 700 earthenware utensils, beside numerous objects of wood, stone, bone, etc., has been brought to Washington and is now in the National Museum. Competent judges are of opinion that it is the finest single collection of prehistoric pottery thus far made on the Western Hemisphere. After leaving Sitiaki, Mr. Hodge made a tour of the pueblos of New Mexico, beginning at Zuni, then visiting Laguna and Acoma, and in turn the villages scattered along the upper Rio Grande and tributary valleys from Isleta to Taos. The The primary object of this reconnaissance was the identification of the names of certain provinces, tribes, and pueblos mentioned by Spanish explorers in the 16th and 17th centuries, and the collection of data relating to the ethnology, and especially to the kinship systems of the pueblos, of which comparatively little was hitherto been known. In these investigations, Mr. Hodge was very successful, for except among the Tiwa, he was enabled to obtain complete records of all the clans, both existing and extinct, from all the tribes, including the Pecos, of whom there are but 2 survivors, much valuable data which will contribute to the identification of tribal and villages and names of Spanish record, as well as bearing on their cosmogony, migrations, etc. He also succeeded in locating on the Rio Grande the village whence the Haino people of Tusayan migrated nearly 2 centuries ago, in determining quite clearly that the pueblos of Cahuayca and Payuki at Tusayan were abandoned during the historic period, the inhabitants moving to Laguna and Sandia respectively, and the descent among the Tewa people, at least in the Nambe, Santa Clara, Tusuque, as Ignatic, while among all other pueblos descent is invariably in the line of the mother. These and many other problems which in the past have puzzled ethnologists not a little, Mr. Hodge has at last been able to solve. End of section 5.
Section 6 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Geographic Literature. The Yellowstone National Park, Historical and Descriptive. Illustrated with maps, views, and portraits. By Hiram Martin Chittenden, Captain, Corps of Engineers, USA. 397 pages. Cincinnati, The Robert Clark Company, 1895. $1.50 net. This book comprises 3 parts: historical, description, and the future. The first contains an excellent summary of the early trappers' tales regarding this region, showing, as is well known, that they were not unacquainted with its marvels. It recounts the Washburn and Hayden expeditions, the legislation establishing the national park, and the numerous army expeditions which, for exploration or pleasure, have traversed it. It summarizes also the administration of the park. The second part describes rather inadequately the topography, geology, fauna, and flora of the region, and then, in the ordinary guidebook form, describes a tour of the park. The third part, which is very brief, only 18 pages in length, is devoted mainly to restating the well-known arguments against permitting the entrance of railroads. The book closes with a series of appendices comprising a list of geographic names, with their origin, the legislation affecting the park and rules for its administration, a statement of appropriations for its maintenance, a list of its superintendents, and a bibliography. It is difficult to place this book. It ranks far above the ordinary guidebook, yet as a history its value is lessened by the military bias of the writer, and as a geographic work descriptive of this interesting region, it may be characterized by the statement that only 14 pages are devoted to its geography and geology, 13 to geysers and hot springs, and 11 to the native life of the region. The book is profusely illustrated with beautiful cuts and contains several maps, but the latter are not in keeping with the typography and with the other illustrations. 16th Annual Report of the United States Geological Survey, Part 3, Mineral Resources of the United States, 1894, Metallic Products, 646 pages, Washington, 1895. It is not easy to recognize in the handsome royal octavo volume before us the mineral report of the Geological Survey, which has hitherto appeared in so much less attractive a form. Although Dr. Day's reports no longer constitute a series by themselves, they cannot be said to have lost even in individuality, for the new volume is so profusely illustrated with maps and diagrams, and is in almost every other respect so distinctly superior to its predecessors, as not only to add greatly to its practical value, but to place it in the very front rank of those admirable publications with which the United States government enriches from time to time the scientific literature of the world. The report contains statistics of the production of the various metallic minerals. Those of the non-metallic are to follow in a separate volume, in the different states of the Union. But it does more than this. It presents like statistics, in many cases extending over a long series of years, for other countries, together with tables of exports and imports. In addition to these statistical compilations, it contains several hundred pages of interesting and instructive text on the geographic distribution of the mineral resources of the world, in the preparation of which several eminent experts have been specially employed. The volume is, in short, a veritable mine of valuable information concerning some of the most important branches of human industry. Terrestrial Magnetism, an international quarterly journal, published under the auspices of the Ryerson Physical Laboratory. A. Michelson, Director, Chicago University Press, Volume 1, Number 1, January 1896. Edited by L. A. Bauer, with the cooperation of a large number of American and foreign associates. The compass is a very old invention, the discovery of its north and south pointing property having been made by the Chinese centuries ago. It is more than 4 centuries since it received a fixed place in navigation under the name mariner's compass. That it does not point truly north and south, but departs or declines from the meridian, was known in Columbus's day. At that time it was supposed that the departure from true north, or declination of the needle, was constant for any one place, though not the same in all places. That it is not always the same at any one place is said to have been discovered by Columbus, so that the variation of the variation is a discovery 4 centuries old. That the needle is free to move in any direction, would not hang level, but that one end would decline or dip below the horizon, is also an old discovery, having been discovered by George Hartmann in 1544. And lastly, that the force that acts upon the needle to make it point north and south is not the same in all places, has been long known. The true cause of the behavior of a compass needle has been a field for speculation and study ever since its peculiar behavior was observed, and a few students had up to the time of Gauss proposed and laboriously worked out ingenious theories to explain the phenomena observed. The publication of Gauss's great work in 1838, however, marked a great advance and gave a new and powerful impulse to the subject. The Magnetic Union, formed in the 3rd decade of the present century, chiefly owing to the researches of Gauss, caused the establishment in various parts of the world of magnetic observatories founded and maintained by various governments. Of those so founded in the 40s, several have maintained a series of almost uninterrupted observations to this day. This period of 60 years has seen progress in our knowledge of terrestrial magnetism, but without any epoch-marking event. A vast number of observations have been accumulated, the 24 constants in Gauss's fundamental formula have been more accurately determined, and a number of minor phenomena observed and explained. But the subject is far from being exhausted. The modern applications of electricity to practical affairs is not without its effect upon the subject of terrestrial magnetism. Is not the journal before us, then, to mark a new epoch in our knowledge of this subject? It seems strange that when almost every other branch of science has long had its special journal or organ, we should have waited almost for the dawn of the 20th century for the first number of the first journal devoted to a matter of such great practical moment and for 4 centuries known by all civilized men to be important. We welcome this journal, then, as a needed one, rightly conceived and giving promise of usefulness. It enters, and enters under favorable auspices, a field not hitherto occupied by any scientific journal. The names of the editors, the laboratory, and university from which it comes, all combine to promise excellent results. It will be strange indeed if distinct gains in human knowledge do not result from this enterprise. The editor, Dr. Bauer, though a young man, is a most enthusiastic student in his chosen field. After several years of service in the United States Coast and Geodetic Survey, devoted chiefly to magnetic computation, he went to Europe and devoted his energies to magnetic studies. His doctor's degree was obtained last year as the outcome of these studies. To him, more than to any other, belongs the credit of founding the first journal given wholly to the subject of terrestrial magnetism, and patriotic Americans will perhaps derive some satisfaction from the fact that the journal was founded in the United States. To the editor and his associates, and to the University of Chicago, we tender our congratulations and hope for them a large measure of success. End of section 6.
Section 7 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. Yucatan in 1895. The following is taken from a valuable report recently received at the Department of State from Mr. R. L. Oliver, United States Consul at Merida. The government census is approaching completion, and from data already received, it is apparent that the total population of the state approximates 500,000, of whom 60,000 are in Merida. Yucatan has always been considered among the most advanced states of Mexico in point of education. Schools have attained a high order since the advent of independence. While under the control and supervision of the local governments, the system of matriculation and education is mapped out by the federal and state authorities through their respective boards of education. The law is compulsory, and though it is not strictly enforced in Yucatan, reports show a good attendance. Sectarian schools are in decadence. In fact, they are only primary schools for the young. The revenue for their support is derived from donations by patrons. The non-sectarian or public schools are maintained at the expense of the state. The governor appoints directors who in turn select professors and teachers. The total expenditure for public instruction for the scholastic year 1894-95 has been about $100,000 gold. This sustained 435 schools. Manufactures are confined to articles for local wants, such as soap, matches, candles, shoes, rope, etc. There are 4 railways owned and operated exclusively by natives. One broad gauge road has 75 miles in operation. The others, narrow gauge, average about 60 miles each, completed, but are in course of extension. Tariffs for passengers and freight are about 1/2 the rates charged for local business in the United States. Except wheat, rye, and other small grains, almost any plant will thrive, but the principal products are corn, beans, sugar, and hemp. The last named is a phenomenally hardy plant and flourishes almost equally well with or without rain. Corn, beans, and sugar require irrigation and yield barely sufficient for home requirements. If there is a failure, as at present in corn, the deficiency is supplied from Mexico or the United States. The interior being unable to make up the deficiency in corn, the legislative authorities of Yucatan petitioned the federal government to reduce the import duties on foreign corn, that this necessary article might be within the limit of moderate price. The government scaled the tariff 50% pending the next harvest, and several cargoes have been imported from the United States. The people are very industrious. Necessity would impel them to be so, were they otherwise, for although Yucatan is not an overpopulated country, the industries are so concentrated, so lacking in diversity, and so monopolized that the less fortunate are continually at a disadvantage and must necessarily be on the alert to share in the inadequate distribution. This applies also to the professions. Laborers in the city average 8 hours' work, are paid by the piece in industrial pursuits, and earn about 50 cents gold per day. Railway and skilled laborers earn from 75 cents to $1 per day. They wear the same clothing, chiefly cotton and linen, during the entire year. Sandals of the ancient Egyptian pattern are worn instead of shoes. Trade unions do not exist, and cooperative action is infrequent, except in cases of foreign intervention, concerning which they are extremely sensitive. On the plantations, where it is necessary to be exposed to excessive tropical heat under the direct rays of the sun, no laborers have withstood it as have the native Indians. In past times, unsuccessful colonies were formed by Europeans. Later, Chinese were contracted for to work on the hemp plantations. They were not altogether satisfactory, as they are physically unable to complete the daily task allotted to the native laborers, that is, to cut a certain number of leaves of hemp, sisal, for a stipulated price. The daily task is 2,000 or 3,000 leaves, at the rate of 16 cents gold per thousand. On this largely depends the pecuniary success of the planter, not that his margin of profit is so limited in what it actually costs to produce this fiber, but there is the enormous outlay for the preparation of the lands and for the planting. The necessary delay of 4 or 5 years before the plant is large enough to cut, the instability of the market, which is ever fluctuating, the onerous export duties, state and federal, the large personnel of the plantations, mechanics, overseers, and servants, who, independent of their wages, are advanced provisions and clothing and furnished medicine and medical attendance by the proprietor. There is now a great scarcity of laborers, and with the new applications of the sisal fiber and its consequent increasing demand, it is becoming a serious question how to meet prospective emergencies. A project is on foot to subdue and domesticate the Maya Indians, variously estimated at from 10,000 to 20,000 in number, who have from time immemorial held invincible sway over the southeastern part of Yucatan. It is hoped to augment from them the number of farmhands, but even in the event of accomplishing the subjugation of this semi-barbarous race, it is exceedingly doubtful if the present generation can be utilized, so refractory are they to civilized pursuits and so indolent and thriftless. Their trading posts are on the boundary lines of British Honduras. At times their chiefs visit Belize to purchase cloth, replenish their ammunition, and renew their contracts with the timber merchants, who pay them so much per ton for the privilege of cutting wood in their territory. They are friendly with the British and never interfere with Negro cutters sent from Belize, but a Mexican or a native of Yucatan dares not encroach upon their lands. As this part of Yucatan is more healthful and its soil better adapted to the cultivation of fruits, sugar cane, and grains, it is not improbable that after the pacification of the Mayas, the government will offer inducements to foreigners seeking homes in the tropics. The geographical and the topographical situation of this part of the peninsula would indicate that it is essentially a horticultural district. Down by the Caribbean Sea, it is easily accessible to shipping, and its products would find a market. It lies in the path of vessels that now ply between the southern ports of the United States and ports of British and Spanish Honduras. This would also be the route for vessels to and from Nicaragua in the event of the building of the canal. Another advantage of transcendent importance is that of Ascension Bay, which is one of the largest and deepest harbors in all Mexico, and with the exception of Acapulco on the Pacific, affords a safer anchorage than any other. This is a desideratum of no little magnitude when it is known that most of the Mexican Gulf ports are open roadsteads, and that in the winter months, when northern are frequent, shipping is hazardous and uncertain. Up to 1891-92, the credit of Yucatan in Europe was unlimited, and our merchants enjoyed an enviable reputation for integrity, but they were overtaken by the financial crisis, which found them overstocked and deeply indebted. Collateral security shrank, debts contracted in gold had to be met with its equivalent in silver, which had coincidentally depreciated in its paying value 50%. Money became stringent, and finally the collapse came. Many large dealers in dry goods and miscellaneous articles were forced to suspend. They represent to European creditors millions which are hopelessly lost. This unfortunate state of affairs is largely due to the long credit system. However, this salutary lesson has had the effect of restricting them to more business-like methods. The tide of trade will eventually turn to the United States, this market affording quicker transportation facilities. The chief articles of import embrace groceries, canned goods, etc., dry goods, notions, cashmeres, men's furnishings, millinery, and hardware of all descriptions, except plows, hoes, etc., which are not used. Henequen, sisal, is the chief export. The annual output is nearly 400,000 bales of 400 pounds each. In the first quarter of the present year, there were shipped 81,030 bales, valued at $582,932.50, United States currency, on which state and federal duties amounting to $132,481, $71,612 United States currency were paid, over 12% ad valorem. Of the 81,030 bales shipped, 66,269 were destined for the United States. With the exception of a small fraction, they were transported in other than American vessels. The August 1895 imports amounted to 6,568 tons. 2,133 tons were imported in American vessels, 4,435 tons in English, Norwegian, and German vessels. The exports amounted to 6,600 tons, of which 560 tons were exported in American vessels and 6,040 tons in English, Norwegian, and German vessels. From January to June 1895, there were shipped to interior points of Mexico 3,070 tons of coarse, unrefined salt. The high tariff on foreign salt makes it an expensive article. The home mines are difficult to work, and as in most cases, they are only surface deposits of the sea. The yield depends greatly upon the weather. The exports of logwood for the first 3 months of 1895 show 2,634 tons, valued at $80,000 in United States currency, cleared for European countries. Other articles of export in small quantities are hides, hammocks, sarsaparilla, etc. The total declared exports to the United States for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1895 were from Progreso, $2,062,909, from Merida, $897,702, total $2,960,611 in United States currency. Value of imports during the fiscal year 1894 to 95, $1,092,981. Value of exports, $8,376,680. Total amount of federal duties paid thereon, $1,155,900. $932. End of section 7. Section 8 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. Geographic Notes, North America. Franz Joseph Land. The published statements of Mr. A. Montefiore, the spokesman of the Jackson-Harmsworth expedition, now enable one to definitely outline the outcome of the expedition down to July last. Jackson left Cabaroa in the Windward August 16, 1894, and met the ice pack in 76 degrees, 49 minutes north, 49 degrees east. Belle Island was sighted 30 miles distant, August 25th, but unfavorable ice conditions prevented landing there or at Cape Grant, which was in sight 6 days later, distant 40 miles. A landing was made September 6th at Belle Island, and the ship was frozen in while discharging cargo September 13th. Jackson, with his chosen explorers, passed the winter very comfortably in a wooden house erected at Cape Flora. The ship's crew wintered on the vessel and lost one man, the health of others being unfavorably affected. About 60 polar bears were killed, 4 being females. An autumnal depot was laid down at Cape Barents and a spring one in March 1895 by a trip of 6 days at Peter Head, entrance of Markham Sound. The long journey, in which 4 ponies were used with great advantage, occupied from April 16th to May 13th. Softening sea flows and signs of open water constrained a return from the farthest north, 81 degrees, 20 minutes north, 54 degrees, 53 minutes east. Payer's map of 1874 is said to be inaccurate and misleading. Zichy, Alexandra, and Oscar lands resolved themselves into groups of islands, and Richthofen Peak of Payer could not be located. Mr. Montefiore, it is said, declares that Jackson's success in his first year is unprecedented. If such report be correct, this will not be the first capable explorer who may ask protection from injudicious friends who seek to aid him by unfounded aspersions of others. European explorers are able to refute on their own account Montefiore's claim, especially Payer, who, starting from a more southerly point, surpassed Jackson's latitude by 37 miles. For America, it is indisputable that Hall, in 1870-71, far exceeded Jackson's latitude and opened up a new route and region, surpassing in importance and extent anything that Jackson has done. This with the loss of one man, himself. Greely, in his first year, 1881-82, explored 4,000 square miles of new land and surpassed the highest latitude made before or since without the loss of a man. Peary, in 1891-92, made the most remarkable inland ice journey on record, crossed Greenland to a point far beyond his predecessors on the East Greenland coast, with the loss of a single man by accident. Against this is Jackson's northing of some 80 miles, with the loss of 3 men, 1 at Cape Flora and 2 on the return voyage of the Windward. Alaska. Congress is to appropriate $75,000 to mark the Alaskan boundary along the 141st meridian of west longitude, on which meridian have been determined 3 important points: Mount St. Elias, 40 Mile Creek, and Porcupine River. By independent surveys by United States and Canadian engineers, The points established differ only 6 feet at Mount St. Elias and 400 feet at Porcupine River. Canada desires to establish the meridian astronomically by joint scientific survey, which would require several years. The United States favors, as a less difficult and more speedy plan, a survey based on the points already established. Mexico. According to the last message of President Diaz, 566 miles of new telegraph lines have been built, the most important uniting Tacotalpa, Chiapas, with Penosic, Tabasco, opening a new route with Guatemala and making a total mileage of 56,442 miles. Among important railway extensions is that from Monclova to the Pacific, of which 292 miles have been approved. The surveys of the road from Merida to Campeche are progressing, and the plans of the lines from Merida to Progreso have been adopted. The drainage works of the Valley of Mexico are almost concluded. The excavations have amounted to 53,160,000 cubic feet, and the tunnel is finished for a length of 32,140 feet. The Grand Drainage Canal is nearly 30 miles long. Surveys have been completed for a cable road to connect the Interoceanic Railway with the summit of Popocatépetl, ascending from the Ranch Samacas on the northwest side. The railway is mainly for the transportation of sulfur from the volcano, but it will be available for tourists. Work has been commenced on a line from Barataran on the Mexican International Railroad to Laredo, Texas, and thence to Mir, Mexico, on the bed of the Gould Railroad, graded about 10 years ago between these points. The government has modified its tax on minerals, which now amounts to 5% of the value of silver and gold. It is divided into a federal stamp tax of 3% and a coinage tax of 2%. Mexican smelters operating under governmental concessions are not liable for the coinage tax on silver extracted from low-grade lead and copper ores. Central America. Nicaragua. A telegraph line has been built between Acoyapa and Rama. The work on the railway between Rama and San Ubaldo, 178 miles, began July 28, 1895, and should be completed in 2 years. The Nicaraguan government has extended its monopoly of native distilled spirits to its Atlantic coast districts, except to the free port of San Juan, and imposes corresponding duties on foreign spirits. South America. The Emperor of Brazil once gave a concession to an Englishman to open the channel connecting the Orinoco with the Amazon, and the latter was to have the exclusive right to navigate the waters for a term of 25 years as a reward for his enterprise. But for some reason or another, the contract was not carried out. The bronze statue of George Washington, erected by Guzman Blanco at Caracas, is believed to be the only statue of the father of his country outside the United States. The inscription upon it states that Washington filled one world with his benefits and all worlds with his name, a unique tribute to his greatness that was probably written by Blanco himself. During the visit of Bolivar to the United States, he spent a day at Mount Vernon, where, placing his hands reverently upon the coffin of Washington, he made a solemn vow to devote his life to the liberation of his country. Reaching his native land, he became active in the revolutionary propaganda and soon had to seek refuge in Europe. 15 years later, however, after a struggle to which that of our revolutionary fathers offered no comparison, he sat in the capital of Bogota, the founder of 5 republics, Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, the last having been named in his honor. At that time, the states were consolidated under a single government, with Bolivar as president. After having for the fourth time been elected president, he was driven from the country and died in exile. On the upper Orinoco, during the struggle of Venezuela for independence, occurred the only naval battle that was ever fought on horseback. Bolivar, at the head of his army, had been trying to cross for several weeks, but was prevented by several Spanish gunboats that moved up and down the stream as he did. Becoming exasperated, General Paez one night spurred his horse into the stream, followed by 3,000 llaneros, or cowboys, whose horses had been taught to swim as well as to gallop. The Spanish fleet was taken entirely unawares. The llaneros clambered from their saddles to the decks of the vessels and let their horses swim back to shore alone. Thus, after cutting off their own retreat, it was a question of win or die, and so desperately did they fight that every vessel was captured. The Ceiba Railroad in Venezuela, originally 30 miles long, has been extended from Mendoza eastward a distance of 32 miles to connect with the branch from Valera, 15 miles long. Another line is under construction from Encontrados to La Fria, 62 miles. It is intended to extend the road 25 miles farther to San Cristobal, the commercial center of a great agricultural section. Contracts have been made also for railroad lines from Maracaibo to Perijá and from Lake Maracaibo to Carora. The former is to be built within 2 years and the latter within 5. Asia. Syria. The first railway was opened August 3, 1895, under French management. It extends from Beirut to Damascus, a distance of 91 miles. China. Monsieur Berthelot, French foreign minister, says that the Franco-Chinese Treaty opens to French trade a region containing 100 million inhabitants. Its capital is Chongqing. Persia. Concessions have been granted to Herr Moral to construct a carriage road from Tehran to Baghdad and a steam or electric railway from Tehran to villages 10 miles north. A Russian company has been granted a concession to construct a harbor at Enzeli. Japan. The sum of $13 million has been voted for a double-track railway to be built between Tokyo and Kobe, 376 miles, passing through Yokohama, Kyoto, and Osaka. Previously, 29 concessions have been granted, covering 2,193 miles, of which 1,549 miles have been opened. Of state railways, 580 miles have been completed and 398 miles are in course of construction. India. The efforts of Mr. A. F. Mummery and 3 others in August 1895 to explore the Nanga Parbat region of the Himalaya Mountains ended in the death of the leader and 2 Gurkha soldiers. Mummery was turned back by the illness of a Gurkha at the height of 20,000 feet on the main peak of Nanga Parbat. Later, Mummery and the 2 soldiers were lost while exploring a side glacier, being presumably buried under an avalanche. The Mekong. The French are rapidly developing the region lately ceded by Siam. A telegraph line is to be constructed from Atapen, the center of the Namkong Gold District, and post offices are also being established. Steamers will soon be plying on the Mekong. That river has been found navigable for 1,500 miles. Lieutenant Simon, in the French gunboat La Grandière, steamed 900 miles from Stung Treng to Luang Prabang and reports that at high water the rapids are navigable to Kiang Kong, 220 miles higher up the stream. Siberia. Last summer, the veteran Arctic skipper, Captain Wiggins, took 400 tons of English merchandise up the Yenisei to within 180 miles of Yeniseisk. The Russian government admitted the goods free so as to encourage navigation to Siberia by way of the Arctic Ocean. The completion of the Trans-Siberian Railway seems to be assured by the negotiation in Berlin of 3 Russian railway loans, aggregating $55 million. Whether Russia has secured from China authority to cross Manchuria to an ice-free port is yet a mooted question. Africa. Ashanti. A telegraph line is being constructed from the coast to the interior along the principal trade route. Egypt. A geological survey to be completed within 3 years at a cost of £25,000 has been sanctioned by the Khedive. It will be carried out under the direction of Captain Lyons, R.E. Abyssinia. The Italian army is constructing a good military road between Adowa, Adigrat, and Makale. An administration is being established with the view to promoting colonization. Congo Free State. According to the statements of the Reverend John B. Murphy, an American Baptist missionary who speaks from an experience of several years, the authorities of the Free State are committing shocking barbarities in connection with the exploitation of the rubber trade. The natives, as far as practicable, are abandoning the Belgian for French territory where they are well treated. South Africa. The delimitation of the railway strip on the eastern frontier of Bechuanaland is in progress, the survey being made by Colonel Gould Adams. This delimitation is made under an agreement with the native chiefs regarding the extension of the railway to Matabeleland. The railway company surrenders a subsidy of $1 million for land grants, enhanced police powers, etc., which ensures its future control of the trade routes to this region. The Natal Transvaal Railway is now in operation as far as between Durban and Heidelberg, and the section from the latter point to Johannesburg is in process of construction. The heavy spring rains have postponed the opening of the through railway service from Natal to the Rand. The Transvaal is now served by 3 lines, the others being the Cape and Free State and the Delagoa Bay. Telegraph communication between Cape Town and the East Coast is now continuous through the opening of the line between Umtali and Beira. The necessity of concerting measures to prevent the utter extinction of the African elephant is again being urged. It is said that the Germans are taking steps to protect the few herds remaining in German territory, and it is to be hoped that the British colonial authorities will lose no time in following their example. End of section 8. Section 9 of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by BettyB. The Valley of the Orinoco by T.H. Gignilliat, United States War Department. In the map of the valleys of the Orinoco and Essequibo rivers, showing Venezuela and British Guiana, Plate 5, the territory between the shaded area and the Corentin River shows the extent of British Guiana as given in a map published by William Faden, Geographer to His Majesty, January 1st, 1820. This country, acquired by the English through conquest and formally ceded to them by the Dutch in 1814, then contained some 20,000 square miles. The lighter portion of the shaded territory shows the first extension of British Guiana to the west after Faden's map of 1820. This expansion appears on a map published in London in 1840 by Robert H. Schomburg. which included the light shaded area above mentioned, about 40,000 square miles. Schomburgk held an English commission to draw the boundary line, but it does not appear that Venezuela was represented in the survey. The darker portion of the shaded territory shown on Plate 5 represents the subsequent extension of British Guiana, as shown by a series of many recent publications. Since 1840, maps and other publications have appeared, drawing line after line farther to the west, until some 49,000 square miles have been added to Schomburgk's acquisition. In this way, the area of British Guiana has increased from about 20,000 square miles, as shown on the Faden map of 1820, to 109,000 square miles, the area given in the Statesman's Yearbook of 1895. Gold was discovered in a new section of this area to the northwest in 1884, and an official Venezuelan report places the gold output of this section in 1890 at $1 million. But there is a larger interest at stake than all this territory with all its gold. It is the control of the valley of the Orinoco, an area of about 600,000 square miles, which comprises a very large portion of South America north of the Amazon River. It is not generally known that the best entrance to the Orinoco River is within the original Schomburgk line. Dr. Munoz Tebar, the successor of Señor José Andrade as president of the state of Zulia, Venezuela, states, after a personal examination, that the best entrance to the Orinoco River is through the Guayma River and Mora Passage to the Barima River, and thence to the Orinoco. Authorities appear to agree that the other mouths of the Orinoco are shallow and obstructed by sandbars. Dr. Tebar gives the depth of the Mora Passage as over 60 feet, and would lead us to infer that there was no bar at the entrance of the Guayma. If this means that there is a clear channel over 60 feet from the sea through the Mora Passage to the Orinoco River, it is a most important piece of information. The square black marks in this locality show the position of English trading stations established between 1885 and 1887. In addition to the authorities above quoted, the commercial map of F. Bianconi, Paris, 1888, was used in compiling the map on Plate 5. End of Section 9. End of the National Geographic Magazine, Volume 7, February 1896.